David, you had predicted staff changes. Others had as well. We see that those have been implemented. Dan Mullen seems to be safe as long as he wants to stay at Florida. But at 2-5 in the conference, 4-5 overall, they win the game against Samford. You would figure, although we've seen Samford push Florida State to the brink a few years ago and a few other teams at Mizzou, Florida State. Do you think that there's any scenario that plays out in which Dan Mullen could lose his job?
I do, Mark. And honestly, even after the South Carolina game, I think that. I assumed with Dan Mullen he would win these last 4 games in November, and that would keep his job safe. I think everything is on the table right now as far as the future of Dan Mullen in Florida. And you lose to one of Missouri or FSU, then if I had to say it right now, I think Dan Mullen is back. You lose one of those 2 games, I really don't know. I'm really not sure Dan Mullen is back at Florida. You lose one of to Missouri or FSU. You lose both of them. And look, I think Florida should move on right now, Mark. I mean, I said that on the podcast yesterday. I don't think with the way Dan Mullen's recruited and constructed this roster, I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't see hope in catching up with Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, Auburn, Texas, Oklahoma, when they move into the conference as well. I mean, this is not a just 2022 thing. You got to look beyond 2022 and where's this program going to be when the SEC expands in a few years and recruiting gets a little more difficult with those 2 teams joining in. The conference itself gets a little more difficult. I don't see light at the end of the tunnel right now with the way this roster is constructed the last few years. And now all the questions with coaching changes and what do coaching changes mean? Dan Mullen needs an immediate fix in 2022. Does a complete staff overhaul fix that? Is there patience? How much time is going to be given to Dan Mullen to fix this? I think, after this year, I think the best path for Florida would be to make wholesale changes, starting with Dan Mullen and bring in a new staff. But if that doesn't happen and Dan Mullen makes these sweeping changes underneath him, there will need to be some immediate impacts in 2022 to show some growth, to show some promise, because that promise really isn't there in the roster. It really is not when you compare it to the SEC week in and week out and who you're playing week in and week out. That it's blind faith, hope, and optimism right there. If you want to sit here and say Dan Mullen's going to compete for championships, because history tells us he's not with this roster construction from the last few years. So, Mark, and part of these coaching changes now after the South Carolina game with Hevesy and Grantham, there's some big boosters that were highly ticked off Saturday night in that performance. And I think these moves, as I told you, this would have been made regardless. That performance Saturday night and some pressure sped that up. Those moves were made because people wanted those moves made right now. So we'll see what losses mean, if another loss comes along the way. But there's a lot of big money, big boosters, Mark, talking behind the scenes, not too happy with the direction of the Florida Gator program right now.
So unless I'm reading this wrong, we shouldn't necessarily be totally surprised at what's happened here. Dan Mullen's taken over a program and he's taken Jim McElwain's players and he's coached them up and they performed better under Dan Mullen. Mm-hmm. And so he improved them to 10-3, 11-2, winning New Year's 6 games. And then he gets his roster and his recruiting drops off. And now he's playing more with his players and they're not good enough.
Right. I mean, all these questions we're asking about Dan Mullen, we shouldn't be asking these in year 4. When he was hired, 2022 is supposed to be, all right, we're competing with Georgia for SEC championship. Yeah, you were in the SEC championship game last year. Okay, we get that. That doesn't mean you fall off a cliff the next year. That's exactly what's happened here. For Dan Mullen and the roster building and the roster part of this, you're supposed to build it up enough to, compete and be competing with Georgia. The game in Jacksonville a couple of weeks ago was supposed to be for all the marbles. I mean, Florida was already out of the race by then. That's not what you expected in year 4. And Mark, the biggest thing, recruiting is number 1 for me. It always has been. I think it needs to be for every program out there. But it's also been the things you've been able to count on from Dan Mullen that you can't no longer count on. Where's the quarterback development for this year? Where's the game management? Where's the clock management? Turnovers, penalties, everything is critical. And those are things you were able to count on with Dan. You don't even get those anymore. That's how you end up 4-5.